Welcome, everybody, to the Sentinels of Liberty podcast. I am your host, Redbeard, and it is a great pleasure to have everybody join me this evening. I have a couple pieces of housekeeping that I'm going to try and get out of the way as soon as I possibly can so we can dive into our episode. Just a couple things here. So next week, I'm going to be doing an episode with a couple of wonderful people that I know regarding 9/11. So I hope you guys and gals are going to stop by next Thursday for that episode. It's going to be a pretty good conversation. We're going to talk about the event, things surrounding the event, what happened afterwards, and even more. So stay tuned for that. I'll try and get that one scheduled up as soon as I possibly can. So that way you guys can kind of be prepped for that. And when it goes to pop up, you can join as soon as you possibly can. In addition, so antiwar.com currently right now has a opportunity to be able to donate. If you go to antiwar.com, I did post something in the discussion. Go give them some love. Go check out their work. They do a lot of really good work. Scott Horton, who I just had on Thursday, is the editorial director for antiwar.com, and he also writes pieces in there along with some really great people such as Andrew Napolitano and Ray McGovern and a lot of other people that you may or may not know. Go get yourself acquainted with those guys and gals and see the work that they do. It's really good stuff. And if you donate, you're really helping a good cause. Nobody asked me to say that. I just really think that their work is some pretty top tier stuff on a lot of things that are going on around the world, and they're worth supporting. So those are pretty much my two things of housekeeping. And going forward in a number of these really kind of directed or more specific topics, I am going to have to write notes down, as I mentioned the last time I did stuff like this. So bear with me. I apologize if I have to glance down and take a look at some of my notes. But I also want to try and bring the highest level of fidelity and the highest level of information that I possibly can to you guys and gals in order to create something that's both informative, but something that you walk away from and, you know, maybe questioning maybe something you knew or something that you thought you knew or whatever the case is. I'm not expecting you all to agree with me on this, but I'm hoping in the very least that we can get some thought processes going to where we can at least get a really good discussion going on this subject and many other subjects down the road. So what is the discussion tonight? The discussion tonight is drafts, conscription, and selective service, liberty versus slavery. Now, on its face, a lot of people, I think, growing up, we've heard a variety of different things as it pertains to the draft, selective service. You know, we've always heard the dirty word of conscription, right? But you know, it's like we don't really. I feel like there's not a whole lot of conversation, and so I want to kind of open this conversation in saying, you know, America was founded on liberty. It wasn't founded on this idea of compelled or coerced servitude. It was founded on liberty. And that was one of the biggest principles because of what our founding fathers had gone through, the things that they had experienced under the British Crown, and looking at history in and of itself. Yet conscription is the claim that your life, your labor, and even your death belong to the state. A situation in which we point the finger at other people, but is it sitting in our backyards? And I would argue that, yes, it does. Thomas Jefferson also condemned it as the most detestable of all oppressions, right? And that's some pretty strong verbiage to say something that is just detestable of all the different oppressions that you can have. And he found that it was the most, and probably for good reason, as you'll see going through this discussion this evening. I also want to highlight one more quote by Daniel Webster, which he had talked about in 1814. Where is it written in the Constitution that you may take children from their parents and compel them to fight battles in any war in which the folly or wickedness of government may engage it? You know, so essentially what he's saying is, you know, where in our founding documents does it say that the government can come in, rip the children from our homes, from the parents, from our communities, and compel them to go fight a war, obviously by folly or their own wickedness, right? And I think that's a really it's a really thought-provoking quote, not because of the fact that like, oh wow, like that's mind-blowing, but it's this idea of like, okay, let's take some introspection here and evaluate like what is actually happening, what has happened in our own history, and are we seeing a pattern, and are those patterns today a little bit more subtle than they are overt? And we're about to get into that. So why does this matter? Well, it matters because the draft is, by its own nature, it's not a neutral policy. It's slavery, essentially, by other name. If liberty means anything, it means the ownership of yourself, right? Property rights. We, as individuals, we are our own property. We own ourselves, right? That is one of the fundamental things that our founders really wanted to emphasize, is the right to self-determination, to live our lives the way that we want to, is so long as we do so in a relatively moral way that does not aggress other people. But what this implies is that our life is not our own, that we are not our own property, but rather we are the subjects and the property of this very government. And as you can tell, that our founders were very, very against this very notion. They are very against this notion, and it was antithetical to liberty, and it still is. A government that can conscript you has already declared you are the property of the state. And I think if you're already starting to pick this up, you're starting to see a theme to where when it comes to the draft, when it comes to conscription, I mean, where does that line sit? And I think that there's varying levels essentially of how these things are carried out. Some are a little bit more subtle. Others, you have examples like in Ukraine, where they're just jumping out of vans and shoving people into that van to force them onto the front lines. Either way, it's all reprehensible, it's all evil, and it is a violation of your very essence and of your liberty. So let's kind of create the question here. Can a nation claim to be free or have liberty if it enslaves its citizens to fight wars of empire, or of the empire on behalf of the empire, however you would like to look at it? Well, we're going to look at this. Draft is slavery by force. Okay, the draft is forced labor backed by punishment. Okay, and this is where things are going to get a little bit interesting. Some people are going to be like, really, like the draft? There's punishments for the draft. Heck, there's punishments for selective service. Really? Well, we're going to delve into this a little bit. If you refuse, you face fines, prison, and lifelong penalties. Selective service law, failure to register, is a felony punishable up to 5 years in prison and a $250,000 fine. Now, I know some of you might think like, wow, that's crazy. How is that even possible? Okay. Well, let me show you something. I'm glad you asked. Let me pull up here. I'm going to add this to the stage. Now let's take a look here. Eligibility. A man who fails to register may be ineligible for opportunities important to his future. He must register to be eligible for state-funded student financial aid, employment in many states, most federal employment, job training under the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act, and U.S. citizenship for immigrant men. Also, if required to register, failure to register is a felony punishable by a fine up to $250,000 and or 5 years imprisonment. Also, a person who knowingly counsels, aids, and abets others to fail to comply with the registration requirement is subject to the same penalties. Just think about that. And this, you want to know where this is from? This is from the Selective Service themselves, right? This is coming from the government website. This isn't simply me just putting this out there. This is coming from the government itself. And I want to show you something here real quick, so you can go and check this out for yourself. The Selective Service System, the official website of the United States government. Okay. So you guys and gals, you can go check this out. I didn't create this website. This is their own website. They did all of this. This is within their own apparatus. That is what they're telling you. If your children do not submit in school, I remember when I saw the selective service card when I was in high school. If your children don't sign that, their entire future is ruined, at least by the words of government, right? Now, some people might say, well, they don't really enforce it. Well, you don't really see cases like that. Look, in the end of the day, it doesn't matter whether or not the fact that it's heavily enforced or not. The fact is what they're telling you is if you don't sign up for the selective service, they can come in, destroy your life, throw you in prison, and fine you $250,000. And with the continued threat that your life will never be the same afterwards. That is what they're telling you. Now, you tell me, is this indicative of a society and a country that values liberty, that values freedom? Or does it sound a little bit like slavery to me, and coercion and compulsion? Well, let's take a look here. Beyond the legal penalties, government cloaks the system in a rhetoric of duty and service. They tell you it's a duty, it is a great service to your nation. Don't put this off. Don't say anything bad about it. It is your duty as an American to comply with this. And where have we heard this idea of compliance? We see this with, arbitrary laws all the time. We see it with things like the Patriot Act. See something, say something. This snitch behavior all the time, destroying the trust between neighbors and friends and families alike. It is your duty, and it is a service to your nation. That's how they always love to frame these things. Strip away the language, and it is fairly simple, right? Serve or suffer the punishment. That is what they're telling you. You either serve and comply, or you will be punished. There's nothing else left to the imagination, and it is fundamentally understood exactly what their intentions are. So let's take a look here at the difference between patriotism versus slavery, right? True patriotism is voluntary. It's wanting to defend your nation. It's wanting to defend your families, your friends, your communities, neighborhoods, your states, right? It is defending your home, your family, and your liberty first and foremost. First and foremost, those things come before anything else. Forced conscription is the opposite. It is obedience, the compulsion of obedience, and falling in line under threat. And they have delivered you that threat. They have told you what they think about you. If you fail to meet or agree to what their demands are. And furthermore, if you tell your children, I don't want you going to war, do not sign this, well, I guess mom and dad are potentially going to have their entire lives ruined for trying to counsel their children against allowing themselves to be compelled into a situation that is going to strip them of their liberty and their rights and their sense of self. I'm not making this stuff up. You saw the government page. You saw what it is that they wrote. You saw what the selective service is. And if you tell somebody not to be involved in that, not to sign it, to refuse to sign it, they will come into your life, as that door is always open. And they can ruin it, destroy it, and make it towards the most untenable thing of your life imaginable. Now, again, are we living as, under the auspice of slavery, or are we a free and liberty-oriented nation? I'm going to keep asking that question as we go through this. So the sanctity of the individual really plays a role here. The founders believed that liberty rested on property rights. John Locke, in particular, argued that the first property a man owns is himself. And I would tend to agree with Locke. And I think that when you look at a number of our other founders, they have fundamentally understood this as being one of the most important, if not the foundational portion of liberty. That if we don't own ourselves, if we don't assert our ownership of ourselves, then we start to run into serious problems down the road that opens the doorway for more abuses, more usurpations, and more abridgments by the government to come in and destroy your liberty, your rights, and your sense of self. Madison also echoed, the ultimate authority resides in the people alone. Another thing that was fundamentally understood by our founders. Hence, you see things like the First and Second Amendment, as well as many others, including the Ninth Amendment, which talks about rights that are, just because they're not talked about in the Bill of Rights, doesn't mean that they don't exist, right? So in the end of the day, if the ultimate authority resides in us alone, then that means that we have the ability to work and change this. We don't have to accept this. We don't have to simply sit back idly by accepting these arbitrary measures. They do what ultimately we allow them to many extents, right? So we have to evaluate our place in this hierarchy of authority and figure out where it is that we want to be. And more importantly, not just where we want to be, but what are we condemning our posterity to if we don't assert ourselves today? Conscription violates this principle by declaring that the state owns you when they need to. So, and some people might say, oh, well, they would never, they're not just going to come and call us up every time. It doesn't matter. It's the very idea that they have the ability, the state or the government has the ability to come and yank you from your life because they need to. The idea of necessity for the government is a very long used usurpation of liberty and rights. This undermines the very sanctity of the individual self. And furthermore, a key point to this is the draft doesn't just take away your time, it takes away your identity as a free human being. I just want to kind of sit on that for a moment because it really should evoke this question now to where, do you have your own identity? Are you your own person? Do you have, do you own yourself? And if you don't, I don't want people to just simply walk away from this segment here and be like, well, if I don't own myself, there's no way of getting that back. I don't believe that's the case. It's very difficult. The road ahead is very arduous and painful and filled and fraught with peril. But I don't believe that the situation in which we can reclaim that which is ours is ever truly lost. It may not happen in our generation or the next generation, but history does tell us that there are patterns and that liberty eventually will come back and people will assert their rights. They will make the changes they need, and tyrants will be in a position of either yielding or, being destroyed or pushed away. History is a great teacher for the many lessons that we have, especially as it pertains to this. And I would ask that people just kind of be mindful of that. Not all hope is lost. Not all hope will ever be lost. But we have to stay focused. We have to work in the communities. We have to work together in order to make the changes that we need. Selective services, I've kind of described as this silent coercion, right? It comes in as this point to where you're not having people like in Ukraine come up to your door necessarily all the time and force you to sign this piece of paper, albeit I'm sure they do in many instances, as we've seen, use that tactic very often. Today, selective service registration is the quiet backbone of conscription. Another thing that I felt was worth identifying and putting out there because I feel it is very much the case, especially when you charge it against, the magnifying glass of liberty. How is this consistent with being a free, liberty-oriented people? At 18, every male must register. High schools, DMVs, other facilities, others often facilitated, automatically. Again, I remember when I was in high school that we were given this slip and everybody was told to sign this slip, right? Very few people fundamentally understand what really it was. And I think today it's one of the greatest follies of our country is allowing this type of thing to happen, to allow people to kind of be cloaked in this realm to where, oh, you're doing a duty, you're taking the yoke of service, but in the end of the day, you're really one step closer to binding yourself in chains that the tyrants don't even have to put on you themselves. They scope it as a form of patriotism. They tell you it's the right thing to do, but in reality, it's just another form of subjugation brought to you by the government. Many don't even realize that they're being compelled to sign this, right? They often, again, they use the window dressing, right? And there's never, at least when I was in high school and this all came around, they never told you about the penalties. They never told you your life would be ruined, but that's the crazy thing is they don't even have to say that. They don't even have to mention that because they take people when they're at their most vulnerable and they say, hey, this is the right thing to do. And I think that most people generally yield themselves to doing the right thing, unknowingly creating a situation that is going to be potentially harmful more often than not down the road. When we look at the penalties for non-compliance, we did kind of go over a few, up to 5 years in prison, $250,000 fine. The civil side of this is the denial of student aid, jobs, and all of those different things that I had recently just discussed. Administrative coercion is tied into government systems that make avoidance nearly impossible, right? And when you look at this and you go back to one of their statements on their website, and it talks about people that, quote unquote, aid and abet, it's like they're talking about criminals. How dare you, you criminal, want to avoid being pressed into service against your will at some point in time. And I find it genuinely amazing that it's become so outward, and it's something that they proudly display. Like you're prosecuting the enemy of your country, if you will, because ultimately, if you don't comply with this forced sense of conscription, the selective service, or the draft, well, essentially, you're probably an enemy to the state, and the state doesn't take kindly to that, so they will rake your entire life over the coals. Silent tyranny exists in this apparatus, and I might say that it does so quite effectively. There's no active draft today, but the punishment is real and it's lifelong. We've discussed this as we've started moving through this. And look, this isn't something that you simply can get expunged from your record, apparently. It's something that is going to follow you for the rest of your life, making it very, very difficult to be able to go about your life, to live in the way that you want to. This idea of self-determination and being able to have prosperity in the United States seems to be overwhelmingly suppressed when you look at these documents and how they compel, coerce, and ultimately force you into a situation that is going to be not only degrading, but detrimental to you as an individual. Again, exerting this idea and implying that you do not own yourself. When we look at the shame aspect of this, the propaganda and the social enforcement, it's amazing, especially today when you look at so much of the rhetoric with people today as they laud and they praise strikes upon Iran and Venezuela and so many other things, this proud patriotism that they all tend to exude. But it's always amazing that when you look at these people, these are also the same people, very much so, that will say a lot of different things as it pertains to not wanting to be a part of the war machine. The draft is enforced not just by law, but by shame. And we see this very prevalent in so many other areas and issues today, especially today, overwhelmingly. Those who resist are branded as being unpatriotic. You're a coward, right? Wanting the enemy to win. Again, they're equating you essentially as either aligning yourself with the enemy, wanting them to win, or being the enemy yourself, or outright just being a coward or unpatriotic. You're not fueling the voice of democracy, which I hate that word democracy. It's repugnant and just vile if you fundamentally understand how democracy works, which is why you don't ever hear me talk about democracy in a particularly positive light. When you look at historical examples of this, however, World War I, A man named Eugene Debs, jailed under the Espionage Act for opposing the draft, declared, "The master class has always declared the wars. The subject class has always fought the battles." I think that's a fairly profound statement when it comes to Mr. Eugene Debs. And I think it's something that we should genuinely think about. You know, this becomes a class system. It becomes a situation to where they can compel you, your family, your children, your neighbors, the people that you love and care for at no expense of their own. And I think that statement by Eugene was a very profound and a very central commentary on this exact situation. When we look at Vietnam, draft resistors burned cards, went to prison, or fled the country. They were vilified, but they stood on their principles. A principle that I would say in many ways was more consistent with liberty than the people trying to compel them into a war that, quite frankly, as with many wars, we never had honesty with. They lied us into these wars. And as a result of being lied into these wars, what we end up getting is a situation where once you're lied into the wars, now we're going to compel you to go fight for this lie. And I think it's absolutely repugnant again. And I rebuke this type of sentiment, and I abhor this type of sentiment. A key point is a free society does not shame men into slavery, but it should defend liberty. When we have gotten to a point to where we are shaming other men or women for refusing to comply with something that's arbitrary or unconstitutional or something that simply just goes against liberty, what does that say about the state of our society? Now, in saying this, what I also want to remind people is, yes, well, there is a demographic of people out there that very much will align themselves with the state because they think that that's the safe play. There are good people out there. There are good people that make their voices heard, that work in various capacities on several different issues. And I would encourage people to go find them, work with them, and create their communities, because that is one of the biggest bulwarks to tyranny and one of the biggest it's one of the biggest defenses for liberty is having a good, sound community and being with people that you can work with to help further liberty in all cases and in all areas within your community, within your state, and so forth. Government's evasion of responsibility is another one that I really wanted to bring in here because I felt that it was very important. The draft also enables Washington to avoid constitutional accountability, right? The Constitution, only Congress may declare war. Well, clearly we've seen how that's been derailed because it's not even Congress declaring war. If you look back at all of the places that we've fought in, you show me where Congress has formally declared war, and I'm guaranteeing you that it's going to be very, 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 very few examples. Instead, we wage this war footing on the idea that, with the War Powers Resolution, we're just going to go forward, and it's only going to be 90 days. It's not going to be any more than 90 days. The president can do this, whatever the case is. But that's absolute pig crap, right? In the end of the day, we know that once you start a war, and I defined war as it pertains to how the founders saw it in a number of different videos. Once you start this war, rarely does it ever actually, well, I don't remember a time where that war has ever stopped before or at the 90-day period to where we were like, all right, we're putting our toys down. It kind of speaks for itself, right? Yet for decades, wars have been fought without declarations, as I've just been saying. When you look at Korea, it was called the police action. When you look at Vietnam, the Gulf of Tonkin resolution, later admitted to be based on lies. It was on lies. No surprise there that they would lie you into a war. And look at how many people were drafted for lies. They died for lies, something that would become more and more and more apparent as time went on with the actions and the positions of the federal government and their ability to get us into all of these illegal, illegitimate, and unconstitutional wars. Again, we see a class system here to where the people that are drafted, conscripted, or drawn from the selective service would always be the people that they see as less than, and they always shield their own people from having to go fight these wars. And as a result, I mean, it's morally repugnant on its face, right? And we haven't even talked about Iraq and Afghanistan, authorizations for use of military force, not formal declarations. Again, ignoring and avoiding responsibility for having blood on their hands for the actions that they have committed to get us further into the Middle East at that point. And then when you look at the fact that they didn't declare war, now they can say, well, technically your sons and daughters didn't go die in a formal war. We never declared war. So, it's really not that big of a responsibility. This is a way of bypassing their ability to have to take much responsibility, which means they can just walk away and they don't have to care about you. They don't have to acknowledge the fact that you now have to deal with trauma, or your families have to deal with certain things that they never otherwise would have had to have dealt with. And moreover, they can just walk away from having to take care of their own people altogether. And when you don't formally declare war, what it really does is it creates an environment to where this responsibility can just be walked away from, thrown aside and into the trash, never having to look at it ever again. Right? So why avoid declarations? To evade scrutiny and responsibility to the people, as I've articulated here. Meanwhile, the Selective Service ensures a pool of bodies exists for wars never approved by the American people. And I want to emphasize that a pool of bodies drawing from your family, from your children, from your neighborhood to go fight their unjust wars for their lives, to support the regime, and not caring about what happens to these people. They can, again, avoid all the responsibility, wipe their hands of you, especially of the veterans and of the American people in general, and say, well, we didn't declare a war, so it's almost like they say, well, it didn't technically happen, right? And they don't have to take responsibility for any war crimes or anything like that. There's no responsibility whatsoever. They can just walk away from the place that they've utterly destroyed and say, well, we didn't technically declare a war. Very, very dangerous precedent. It's a very, very dangerous situation, and one that should never be ignored. Never be ignored. And when you look at this, it's a tightly woven package of tyranny altogether. Undeclared wars, hidden registration, propaganda of shame, and punishment for dissent, all combined into one system of servitude. This is the type of situation that brings us to an empire and moves us away from being a constitutional republic, a republic that our founders fought and died for, that people volunteered to die for, in the hopes that their posterity would be able to live a better life, and a liberty-oriented society where they had the ability of self-determination to live their lives as they saw fit, to run their businesses, to build their homes without government intervention telling us how we're supposed to do that. And today, when we look at it, we not only pretty much don't have any of those things, and the few things that we do have that are kind of a twinkle of an eye as it pertains to a republic are so marred and covered up in our learning institutions that most people don't realize what they've lost. And moreover, this is empire mentality. Let us not mistake ourselves. It's not just an aggression against the American people. Look at all of the people that we have killed. Look at all of the people that this country has destroyed, these countries that we have destroyed with no responsibility whatsoever. It's all been unanswered for. And there are brave people that do work to try and bring that truth out. My recent guest, Scott Horton, has done years of work on this. He's spoken about this ad nauseum, constantly bringing the spotlight over this. The great people over at the Libertarian Institute and antiwar.com work tirelessly to try and bring this about, as well as the 10th Amendment Center and Chris Ann Hall, two of my favorite people. If you want to learn more to preserve your rights and your liberties and to be a fundamental difference in your communities and to be the best version of you that you can be, not only for yourself and your communities, but for your posterity, go look at these people, read what they have to say, and start to learn from these people, because learning will help you not only avoid situations like this in the future, but to tear them down and replace them with nothing. And that is the ultimate goal, to destroy these things and make sure nothing replaces them. We cannot stand for this any longer. A history of resistance is another portion that I want to talk about. Americans have resisted every draft. In the Civil War of 1863, the New York draft riots, sparked by resentment that the rich could buy exemptions while the poor fought, right? How many people learned that while they were in school? How many people even knew that there was even a protest or anything or a riot, as it's specifically described here? Not a protest, but a riot, right? Like people were riotous. They refused to do this, right? Like absolutely not. And there was the schism. We saw the class system that was already taking place, where you had the people that could buy their way out of the draft. And gee, I wonder where we're seeing this today, not only in the United States, but we see this in places like Ukraine, where all of these wealthy individuals, these oligarchs getting fat off of war, protect their own families, not to send them to the front to get eaten up by the war machine. It's absolutely repugnant. In World War I, thousands were jailed for dissent. In Vietnam, millions protested. Draft became the symbol of government tyranny, which it still is today. And each generation instinctively knew conscription was a betrayal of liberty. Flat out, full stop, that's what it is. You do not enslave your own people to go fight your wars. We were founded on a nation that praised the militia and also found that there was necessity in voluntary interaction, right? They fundamentally understood that if the militia was a strong bulwark and was a strong mechanism in our society, not only could you have a voluntary involvement, but you also had one of the most effective mechanisms, not only against tyranny abroad, but tyranny at home. The resistance itself is proof. Americans knew the draft did not belong to a free republic. Again, we're shining a light on something that we've talked about as a consistent theme here, right? This is not consistent with a free or liberty-oriented republic. It is not consistent with a liberty-oriented and driven society. It, quite frankly, is the antithesis to these things. So I kind of want to close this out here on a few notes. We're going to reflect on what it is that we just talked about. Conscription is not defense. It is servitude. Okay, it reduces the citizen to state property, a resource to be used in wars that they never chose. Ultimately, it undermines self-ownership, liberty, and the very republic the founders fought to establish. And I think that should shake people to their core. I want to provide a few closing quotes here by Jefferson, the most detestable of all oppressions. Again, using that quote just to hammer home how terrible this type of system is, and we should not be advocating for it. Not at all. Webster, where is it written? Again, talking about the quote that I said in the very beginning, show us where it is written. Show us where it is written. Okay? Debs, the master class declares the wars, the subject class fights the battles. It's another amazing quote by a person who was jailed for standing up for his beliefs. A call to action is simply this: we need to end the selective service. We need to reject conscription as slavery, reclaim the principle that liberty begins with ownership of oneself. And as sentinels of liberty, we must guard against this silent tyranny to ensure no American is ever enslaved by conscription, selective service, or the draft ever again. We not only owe it to ourselves, but we owe it to our communities and to our posterity. Full stop. In the end of the day, that is the message that I want you guys to go forth with. And I want you guys to hopefully talk to your family with, your friends, and even like-minded individuals. Not only do I believe in what the Defend the Guard legislation fundamentally stands for, and I think their position is extremely valid and really works towards a better constitutional state, but I think we can supplement the Defend the Guard legislation by getting rid of selective service, rejecting the idea of a draft fundamentally, both societally and within our government, and working to make sure that nothing replaces it, reclaiming ownership of oneself. These are fundamental to being a much freer and liberty-oriented society. And after all, liberty is considered to be freedom with morality. And I find that the moral state of this type of compulsion, this type of slavery, this type of doctrine by the state, especially within the numerous ways that they have conducted themselves on behalf of this doctrine, is absolutely morally repugnant and repugnant to liberty itself. I really appreciate you guys and gals taking the time to come out and listen to what I have to say on drafts, conscription, and the selective service. I think it's a very important conversation that we have to have. And I think it's something that is worth having time and time and time and again. We cannot allow this to happen, because if we continue to allow these things to go forward, we condemn our posterity to an even greater realm of slavery and tyranny that we haven't experienced yet. And I would hate the thought of something like that to take root in a place that our founders fought, bled, and died for, gave up everything they had to try and create something that was better. I'm going to take just a few moments here to scroll through some of the comments and see kind of what your guys and gals' thoughts are, maybe respond to a few things, and really just take some time to interact with you. Usually when I do these directed segments, I typically try to just stay on point until the very end. So if you'll give me just a couple minutes of your time, just a bit more, I'd love to be able to respond to what you all are having to say. So let me go back here just a little bit. Your hard-earned money, property, freedoms are not enough. The government must also have your life. This was by Centerline Systems. I think it was a fantastic point, and you are 100% right on. It is amazing, that some people still don't fundamentally understand that, like, when you start to give government and this apparatus power, it will only seek to take more and more and more power as time goes on. So, well said. Absolutely well said, and I think that was very spot on. Let's see a couple more here. The draft is evil by Minnesota Black Robe Regiment. 100%. The draft is absolutely abhorrent. It's evil. It is insidious in all of its different ways and means. And I think, again, just to echo the sentiment, we need to do away with it along with the selective service. And we need to make sure that it never returns in any form ever again, for not only our sakes, but the sake of our posterity. Centerline Systems. In addition to the major legal and moral issues with the draft, conscripts make terrible soldiers. Yes, they do. And it's also a disservice to the people that are conscripted or drafted, because of the fact that, they are more than likely going to be put into situations or conditions of which neither they want to participate, or are subject to very, very arbitrary and or abusive situations, which is also another form of degradation to just the sense of humanity, right? So let me see here a little bit more. So something on snitching here, and I know this was echoed by a few people, but I just want to bring up by David Andert here. Walt's pushed that snitching so hard that actually people said, or people would get paid to snitch. And this is true. We saw this not only in Minnesota during COVID, but we saw this in a number of different areas, to where people would actually get pats on the back for snitching at their neighbors. I think when you look at the larger ramifications through history, I mean, it's really lends itself to some very, very bad situations. Let's see here. So I want to bring this one up again by Centerline Systems. The VA, aka our government, doesn't even care about our vets today, who are all volunteers and, more importantly, lived up to their part of the contract. How do you think the G will treat the conscripts? Yeah, no, and I'm here to tell you, like, in the end of the day, I think when you look at how they treat people that wanted to be there, versus people who they would compel to be there, and we somewhat kind of saw this during Vietnam, it's horrible, right? Like, I mean, it's absolutely repugnant and immoral the way that they treat human beings, notwithstanding people who voluntarily decided to be there, but people that didn't want to be there, right? And the idea that if you don't want to go be part of a war as being constituted as a crime is ridiculous. So Yeah, I mean, it's a great point. It's a fantastic, great point. We had, let's see here, one by Gene the Machine, Gene from across the pond. We had Grass's police paid informers during COVID. When they got found out, they got run out of the town, as they all say. Yeah, 100%. Yeah, and I think it's it's really kind of like the sympathizers back in the day during the revolution. People would turn their own neighbors in. They would sacrifice their own communities in the hopes of either not having the eye of government over them or getting some type of tangible benefit or reward. So that only leads to a lot of really bad issues. Let's see here. Here's another one. Just remember all of the government agencies, politicians, etc., who were exempt from the vaccine. Yeah, I mean, again, we're seeing, especially pertaining to the subject, this class system, right? Like rules for thee, but not for me. And so as a result, this is only going to be emphasized a lot more. Should we get into a major conflict, declared or undeclared? I just want to emphasize that, declared or undeclared, and you're really going to see that schism grow. And quite frankly, I would be surprised if we got into a situation that was bad enough to where they started conscripting people. I think you would see riots. I think you would see people that would absolutely lose their minds to some degree. I'm not going to say entirely, but to some degree. And it wouldn't surprise me at all. Let's see here. Let's bring up another one here. By Learn Me Something, spot on, Redbeard. The powerful, connected, and wealthy will get us into a conflict, but will always shield their own from ever having to spill their blood, while they will guilt or force the masses to. 100%. This is one of the most powerful mechanisms that people use. And I would argue that, there's this realm of useful idiots, right? To where they will go forth. They are the very people that, these higher echelon individuals want to send to war, but they're like, you know what? They're going to be a lot more useful if we allow them to go forth into their neighborhoods, their communities, to guilt the people for not serving their country and compelling them by words that if you don't do this, well, you must be the enemy. You must be cowardly. You must be unpatriotic. And I think that this is something that we saw, especially during COVID and many other instances in American history. And it's very vile, it's very evil, and it's very insidious. Let's bring up another comment here real quick by Gene the Machine. Very interesting and thoughtful show tonight. Thank you. You are welcome, Gene. And I really appreciate you and everybody else who took time out of their day, their evening, to come by and listen to what it is I had to say. Again, I feel like it's a very important conversation, one that has long-term ramifications, especially as it pertains to our children and our posterity. One that I think, if we really look into it and we look at this warfare state, we absolutely have to become involved. We have to be invested in the future to make sure that this doesn't continue to happen and that it never happens again. We have to fundamentally be involved. And I've argued time and time and again, I said it even when Scott was on Thursday, that there is hope, and that hope does rely in community. And I believe community is one of the best vestiges of preserving, defending, and restoring liberty. And I still believe that. I will always believe that. And I think that if you look at the history of our country and the history from the world, that you will find that the surfacing of liberty comes from these small, determined communities of people that refuse the yoke of tyranny anymore and that want to have a better future for their posterity. Let's see here. We got a few more on all issues, climate change. Yeah, so and Center Alliance is talking about so it is with them on all issues, climate change, red meat, lockdowns, carbon. 100%. Yeah, I well said. Gene is the man. Stay safe over there, sir. Absolutely. Gene the Machine. You know, that's forever going to be my nickname for you, Gene. And I hope you accept it with a little bit of humor. You're awesome, dude. Like I said, you've been here since the beginning. So another fantastic comment here by somebody just joining in. Coco and I are watching for a bit. I sent you a picture. Oh boy. Oh boy. Well, we shall see. We shall see what that is. But I appreciate everybody, guys and gals. Look, I can't thank you enough for joining me this evening. I hope you got something out of this conversation. And I really hope that you'll join us next Thursday as it pertains to the conversation around 9/11 and everything that we'll talk about then. Until then, carry forth that torch of liberty. Go forth into your communities. Be that spark. Make a difference. And, you know, if it just so seems to happen, be the leader that people need. And if leadership isn't your thing, it's okay. It's okay to not have to lead. Be involved. Be an active part of your community. Make that difference. And never let that flame of liberty go out. Carry that spark with you forever and be the difference you want to see. And on that note, everybody, I'm going to give you some outro music. So take care, have a good night, and God bless.